Hi. It's taken me a little bit of time to get set up, and I'm hoping that this is going to work. So today's video is about consistency, and I need to keep it at about 15 minutes. It looks like that's what YouTube is going to let me upload to. So 15 minutes it is, and then if we skip anything, then I'll make another video with all the things that we missed in this video. So this is just a little short mini class. I have a 3-hour consistency class that I teach, but I just want to go over the basics with you guys, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. So consistency over a project is important so that you don't start with a garment that has finer yarn at the top and then ends up with thicker yarn, or the twist doesn't change over time so that things kind of move and get kind of funky in your garment when you wear it. It doesn't pucker and do all kinds of weird things. So consistency is important. Consistency in thickness is sort of important. Just, you know, if you want something that looks more professional and less rustic, then consistency and thickness is going to be important. Consistency and twist, I think, is even more important. That changes in your twist is going to make your yarn look less consistent. It's going to change the way the yarn lays in the fabric. I don't know if you've ever noticed, sometimes if you're a knitter, sometimes both legs of the knit stitch look the same. Sometimes one leg is more vertical and one leg lays down like this. That has to do with the twist and how balanced your yarn is. And so you want to be consistent so that your whole garment, the knit stitch, looks the same. And also, I think that working on being more consistent improves your spinning skills too over time, even if there's sometimes when you just want to sit down and just throw some yarn on your wheel and not even think about it. You're going to do some of these things naturally. So the first thing that improves your consistency, I think amazingly, it's sort of like a miracle, has to do with your drafting length. And so let's quickly talk about short forward draw and long draw, how you are going to figure out what your drafting length is. So this is some Corriedale. It's about generally about a 4-inch staple length. You can see that, I hope. When I am spinning, I don't like to draft with a short forward draw more than half the staple length. So you could go up to about a 2-inch draft with this one. So let me show you that. Let's go back. I'm going to show you, actually I'm going to show you my hands and my feet at the same time so you can see what I do. So here, I'm not going to draft more than 2 inches at a time. The reason for that is if I draft more than 2 inches, I don't know, can you see the thick and thin that's happening? Let me do the other arm because my camera's over here. See, there's a thick spot here, and there's a thin spot. And there's a thicker spot and a thinner spot. That's what happens when you draft more than or about the same length as the staple length. So I like to keep it half or less. So let me pull this down and make more of a solid background. So half a staple length or less, you're going to automatically get a more consistent yarn. And see how I'm just coming back to the tips of the fibers in my fiber supply. If you want to do a long draw, that's going to be slightly different, but it's about the same kind of thing. You're going to draft the same distance every time. So when I do a long draw, my forward hand stays in one position, my back hand drafts back, and I stop. And then I come forward. My forward hand C stays in the same position, my back hand there. This is going to give you a little bit of more consistency, but you can see long draw is a little bit less consistent. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it's a little bit less consistent than a short forward draw. That's always how it's going to be, and there's nothing to worry about there, because if I'm going to do a long draw, I'm usually going to do a 3-ply yarn. A 3-ply yarn is going to allow you more consistency anyway, because the lumps, the thicker parts in the 3-ply are never going to really line up, and so it doesn't, a 3-ply is going to give you a more rounded yarn, and you're going to have 2 thin spots and a thick spot that line up, and it's going to look just as consistent as if everything was exactly the same the whole way. Of course, you know, my goal is to get as consistent as I can, but there's some tricks about how to fix that up. In a short forward draw, you want to make sure that you're consistent during the drafting. In long draw, that all gets fixed in the finishing. So it's going to get fixed. It's going to get fixed in the plying, and then it's going to get fixed when you finish that yarn. If you do a little bit of a more violent finishing method, like smacking the yarn around, or if you're going to use plungers or hot and cold, that's going to plump up the yarn, and that's going to make it look more consistent. So with short forward draw, worsted yarn, you want to make sure it's as consistent as it can be while you're spinning. And then if you're going to do a woolen yarn, you're going to fix a lot of those thick and thin spots after the spinning and the plying. Well, sometimes in the plying, and then more in the finishing. The other thing I wanted to make sure that I talk about today is twist consistency. The way to get twist consistency is to keep your hands and feet moving together in a rhythm. So let me put the camera down again, back on my feet and my hands, and let me show you how I do this. So I'm on a 2-treadle, double treadle wheel, but I'm only gonna think about 1 treadle. So every time my right foot goes down, right, draft, draft. See how I draft every time my right foot goes down? Now, we talked about a consistent drafting length, right? Half the staple length. And then now I'm drafting every time my right foot goes down, I draft out. What that does is every time my right foot goes down, that's 1 rotation of the wheel. Every time. Double treadle is the other foot makes half the rotation. So we're just going to think about 1 foot. Every time that foot goes down, that's 1 full rotation of the wheel, which means then depending on whatever whirl you have on, say you have a 10-to-1 ratio. So if the wheel goes around 1 time, the flyer is going to go around 10 times. So that means if I draft 1 inch per treadle, that means I'm getting 10 twists per inch. If I draft 2 inches per treadle, just thinking about my right foot, that means I'm going to get 5 twists per inch, right? And if I do that consistently, every time the draft is approximately the same and it's always on the 1 foot, I'm going to have the same twist per inch over the length of the yarn that I spin. Normally, well, some people call this counting treadles. I don't like to call it that because it sounds, I don't know, it sounds boring, or it sounds hard, or it sounds like something you really don't want to do. But what happens is when I sit down, if I have that rhythm, which I've talked about before when I talked about filling out these, your cards, I have this on there, your draft to treadle ratio. When I keep that rhythm through the entire project, that means my twist is approximately the same as the entire project. I forget what I was going to say about that. Oh, so every time I sit down to spin, for the first like 10 to 15 minutes of spinning, I do have to think about what my drafting ratio is, especially if it's different than my usual one draft to treadle. Sometimes I want to do 2 drafts per treadle. Sometimes I want to do 2 treadles per draft. It depends on how much twist I need in that project. And so every time I sit down to spin, if it's something that is different than my norm, then I do think about it for the first 10 to 15 minutes of spinning, and after that my hands and feet just start to work together. The magic of it is if you then decide that you want to treadle faster, your hand is automatically going to start moving more quickly than it did, because you're already working in that rhythm. Your body's just going to keep it up. It's kind of a fun thing. This takes a little bit of time to learn, but it really changed my spinning life when I learned how to do it. The other thing I want to make sure that I talk about is rewinding bobbins. So now you've spent all this, well, let me go back. The reason that twist is important is, have you ever filled a bobbin and you looked at it and thought it looked beautiful, and then you take the yarn off the bobbin and then you have thick and thin, and you didn't expect it to be like that because your bobbin looked perfect. The reason that thick and thin happens is because your twist is your twist is uneven. So it's important to get your twist even over your bobbin. Now, we're not machines. It's not going to happen that everything is completely beautiful and consistent over the whole thing. But now the next thing is you can rewind your bobbins. I don't do this for every project. I do it for special projects that I really care about. It's not going to be for an everyday sweater around the house, but it would be for a special occasion piece that I want to show my spinning skills, or if you're going to enter your piece into a competition, then you might want to rewind your bobbins. What I do to do that is I spread my bobbin winder and my Lazy Kate, which has my bobbin that I just spun on. I spread them as far apart as I can in the room, 8 feet, 10 feet. And I wind that yarn from one bobbin to another bobbin. And I don't really go super fast. I don't kind of lollygag around, but I want the twist to have time to move around and even itself out over that length. So you can do that with singles. It's a great thing to do with your singles, even out that twist before you apply. And then when I'm making my skein, I do that same thing again. Keep my my bobbin that I'm winding off and my swift or my nitty knotty, whatever I'm winding onto, I keep them as far apart as I possibly can, and that's going to allow the twist from your plying to even out again. And then when you soak your yarn in the sink when it's finished, that again is going to give the twist some time to move around. So it's good to allow your yarn to lay in the sink for a while. Don't just wet it and take it out. Let it in there for a good 15-20 minutes, sometimes a half an hour, You know, so I've forgotten it overnight before, but it's not necessary to go that long. So that's another way that's another time where your twist is going to get to even out. That there was another thing. Oh, I remember. So when I'm going to work on a big project, if I'm doing a sweater, I'm generally going to do a 3-ply yarn. I just like a 3-ply yarn for a solid fabric. If I'm doing stockinette stitch, I just like the way a 3-ply yarn looks in there. So I spin the first 3 bobbins, I ply my yarn, and I make a swatch. If I love it, I move ahead and spin the rest, but I don't ply until the end. So what I happen to have plenty of bobbins. If you don't have a lot of bobbins, you can wind off onto toilet paper rolls. You can wind off onto weaving bobbins. You can wind off onto all kinds of storage devices. Number your bobbins. So you've got your first bobbin, and then maybe you've spun 8 bobbins and you've got your 8th bobbin. Ply those 2 together. If you're doing a 2-ply, ply those 2 together. If I'm doing a 3-ply, I like to do the first, and the last, and one in the middle. That's going to give you, again, more consistency, because, like I said, we're not robots. We do change. Our bodies change. The way we do things change. If our mood is different from day to day, that's going to change your yarn. And so if you ply the beginning and the end and the middle together, that's going to give you a good spread out over the length of the project. Some of you are going to be spinning over a long period of time, and so your wintertime spinning might be different than your summertime spinning, and so you want to ply those 2 together, and that's going to give you more consistency over the length of your project. So that's all I have right now. I have some more things that I want to talk to you about. Don't worry, I'll be back. But thanks for watching, and let me know what your questions are. I'm happy to answer them, especially now that I'm well after that long sickness after Disney. That was crazy. So I'll talk to you soon.